Arizona, summer of 1879. Caleb Ross rode hard toward the Apache village, following an urgent message. Inside the pitch-black tent, the scent of herbs and smoke mingled in the air. An old man lay on a buffalo hide, his breath shallow and uneven. He was Tyokan, a once revered chief throughout the region, now reduced to faded, cloudy eyes. Beside him stood two young women, Neola and Ciala, silent as the night itself. Their broad, strong shoulders and beautiful faces held a depth in their eyes that spoke of something unspoken. Ross. Tyokan's voice was hoarse, each word falling like it came from a deep chasm. My time has ended. There is no one left to protect them. Caleb lowered his head, taking the old man's cooling hand in his own. What do you want me to do? Take them. Away from this land. Do not let them become trophies for the hunters. Give them a place to live. Caleb looked up at the two women. There was no pleading in their eyes, only confusion and a deep fear of being forgotten. He stayed silent for a long moment, then gave a small nod. I will protect them, as I would protect my own blood. Outside, the desert wind howled on, as if trying to erase every trace of the past. But in that moment, a promise was made, a vow to lead two lost souls into a journey none of them could have ever foreseen. The desert wind swept red dust onto Caleb's coat as he led the two Apache women away from the village. The road back to his ranch had never felt longer. No one spoke a word. There was only the sound of hooves pounding the cracked earth and the quiet rhythm of reins tapping against saddles. Tyokan's words echoed in Caleb's mind. Do not let them become trophies. His ranch appeared in the twilight, a small patch of land nestled against a hillside, surrounded by faded wooden fences, a leaning stable, and fields left untouched for years. It was the place he had lived alone for 7 years, ever since burying his wife and the unborn child they never got to meet. A place of sorrow and now, of strangers. From the very beginning, the air inside the cabin was thick with distance. Neola, tall, broad-shouldered, and strong as a warrior, remained wary, her eyes never leaving the gun on Caleb's hip. Ciala was quieter, often sitting for hours by the window, gazing toward the horizon as if still waiting for someone to come for her. One evening, as Caleb stoked the fire in the hearth, the silence was broken by a soft, unexpected question. Why did you help us? Ciala asked, her voice barely louder than wind skimming over sand. Caleb looked up, his eyes distant. Because he once saved my life, and because I do not want to see anyone else hunted down. Day by day, the invisible lines between them began to fade. Caleb taught them how to care for the horses and use farming tools. In return, Neola taught him how to read tracks in the dirt, and Ciala showed him how to mix herbs to treat wounds. Together, they repaired fences broken by storm winds, cooked simple meals over open flames, and slowly learned to trust hands that once belonged to strangers. One morning, as the first light of sun filtered through the cabin window, Caleb saw something that made his chest tighten. Ciala was feeding the horses, and Neola was drawing water from the well, her muscles taut under the early light. The scene stirred something long buried, a memory of his wife laughing in the meadow, and plans that never came to be. What are you thinking about? Neola asked, her voice warm and steady, just like her hands. That it has been a long time since this place felt alive, Caleb replied, a faint smile showing beneath his thick beard. His answer made Neola look at him for a long moment, her gaze softening. The line between protector and protected had begun to blur. They were no longer three lost souls searching for shelter. They were becoming three people learning how to live again, under the same roof. And in that moment, in the rare calm they had found, none of them knew that the real storm had yet to come. That night, the desert wind had finally gone still, no longer howling across the rooftop like it always did. Inside the cabin, only the soft crackle of burning wood remained, casting a warm orange glow across the faces of three people who had once been strangers. Outside, the moon hung in the sky, suspended above the dry land, lighting up the arid world below. After a simple dinner, Caleb leaned back in a wooden chair by the fireplace, turning an unlit cigarette between his fingers. Neola and Ciala sat nearby, their eyes heavy with thoughts unspoken. It had been a long time since this house felt quiet in a way that was not guarded or tense, and maybe that was why the old wounds began to surface. Do you ever feel out of place in this land? Naola asked suddenly, her voice low and rough, like wind whispering through stone. Caleb lifted his head, a deep look flashing through his gray eyes. Every day since I lost them, he answered simply. My wife, my son, both taken by sickness. And since then, nowhere has felt like home. Silence settled over the room. After a while, Naola took a deep breath, as if gathering every bit of courage she had. I feel the same, she said, her eyes fixed on the fire. I grew up being told I was too rough to be a woman, not soft enough to be loved. When I was given to the chief, it was not because of love. It was a trade, arranged to keep peace between the tribes. Ciala gently placed her hand on her knee, her gaze far away. And I, she said, her voice trembling, was once exchanged like a piece of livestock, an offering to the elders of my tribe. Since that day, I swore I would never believe another promise again. The room fell quiet once more. Caleb looked at the two women, so strong, so sharp, like desert stone, yet inside, their souls were torn just like his. It was not weakness that had brought them together, but the shared ache of hearts that had been ripped apart. Maybe, Caleb murmured, we do not have to belong to the past anymore. Maybe this place is where we start again. Naola looked at him, the firelight reflecting in her deep black eyes. Start again, she repeated softly, like she had never dared believe in those two words. That night, no one said another word, but the silence was no longer a wall between them. It became a thread, invisible yet strong, weaving together the pieces of three broken souls. In the flickering glow of the fire, pain was no longer something that divided them, but something that slowly drew them closer. And from that moment on, the little cabin on the edge of the frontier was no longer just a shelter, it was becoming a home. That afternoon, the sun sank behind the red mountains, turning the sky into a deep, dark copper. The air around the ranch was so still. You could hear the wind cutting through the wooden fence. Caleb was checking the horse stable when he noticed 4 riders approaching the gate. The fading sunlight glinted off the silver guns on their belts, and trouble had found its way in. Leading the group was a man in a long black coat, a deep scar running from his ear down to his chin. He stopped his horse a few paces from the fence and spoke with a raspy voice. We came to talk, not to stir things up. Those 2 Apache women you're keeping, they are worth more than this whole run-down cattle pen. Caleb did not move. The 2 women stepped out from the cabin, their eyes cold but unwavering. The man continued, hand them over, and we will pay you 3 times what this ranch is worth. But if you do not, well, you already know what happens next. Caleb tightened his grip around the handle of his gun, his voice low and steady like forged steel. No one here is for sale, and if you want to cross this gate, you'll have to go through me first. The air grew thick for a moment. Nothing but the wind and the hard stares exchanged between both sides. Then the man gave a cold smirk, turned his horse around, and said, we will be back. And next time, we won't be here to talk. The sound of hooves faded into the sunset, leaving behind a heavy silence and a threat hanging thick in the air. Naola stepped beside Caleb, her hand gently resting on his shoulder. They will come back, she said. I know, he replied, eyes locked on the horizon. And when they do, they will not be walking away so easily. That night, the sky held no stars, only darkness blanketing the ranch. But inside the cabin, the fire still burned bright. The 3 of them sat around the wooden table, their eyes set on a future full of danger. There was no turning back now. No more choices to make. They were no longer lost souls, they had become a family, ready to fight for one another. And that meant more than any silver or gold this world could offer. I am truly grateful for your presence here. If this story brought back old memories of dusty sunsets and the sound of hoofbeats echoing in your chest, then subscribe to my channel, so that every day we can sit together once again, and I will tell you another tale of the West. That night, as the moon stretched across the sky and the desert wind howled through the valley, Caleb's small ranch was no longer a place of quiet refuge. Everyone understood. The threat made earlier was no bluff. They would return, and next time, they would come to kill. Inside the wooden cabin, the air was tight, strung like a drawn bow. Caleb laid a land map across the table in front of Nyola and Ciala. "We cannot run," he said, his voice rough but firm. "If we flee, they will hunt us forever. Staying and fighting is the only choice we have." Nyola nodded, her dark eyes steady with resolve. "This is our home now," she said, "and we will defend it with our lives." Ciala gave a faint smile, her hand gripping a gleaming dagger. "I survived being sold like livestock. No one is dragging me away again." Caleb got to work. He stacked sandbags against the cabin windows to build cover. The two women built barricades from old wagons and tree logs around the horse stable. The rifles were cleaned with care, bullets sorted into cloth pouches, and placed at key positions. They all knew the coming attack would be unlike anything they had ever faced. As they prepared, in the thick air of looming war, a rare moment of peace slipped in. Caleb paused, watching the two women work under the moonlight. They were no longer the strangers he had once been tasked to protect. They were comrades, family. If we do not make it through tomorrow night," he said quietly, "I want you both to know. I have never once regretted bringing you here." Nyola smiled softly, her eyes gentler now. "If this is where our story ends, then at least I will end it with honor." Ciala touched his shoulder lightly. "And with someone I trust." As dawn began casting its first pale rays across the distant mountains, everything was in place. In the yard, the wooden fence had become a fortress. Hiding spots were set. Every gun was loaded. Every blade sharpened. The cold morning wind blew with a chill, carrying the scent of dry sand and the omen of blood yet to be spilled. Caleb stood on the porch, eyes locked on the road that led into the ranch. Somewhere out there, he knew, just hours away, shadows would come bringing violence and greed. But this time, he would not face them alone. Three souls once abandoned had become a family ready to fight to the death. And deep down, Caleb knew, it would not be bullets or wooden walls that kept them alive. It would be love, trust, and the fierce will to protect what mattered more than life itself. Before the sun had even risen, the sound of hoofbeats echoed from afar, steady and cold, like the beat of a funeral drum. From the porch, Caleb squinted through the dusty haze. They had returned. And this time it was not just 4 or 5 of them. Nearly 20 riders were advancing, guns drawn, steel flashing in the dying moonlight. There would be no negotiations. This was war. "Take your positions," Caleb shouted, his voice thundering across the empty land. Nyola climbed onto the stable roof with her Spencer rifle already loaded. Ciala crouched behind the sandbags, a revolver steady in her grip, and Caleb, with his classic Winchester in hand, stood firm at the front door like a living wall. The first gunshot tore through the silence. Bullets slammed into the wood, splinters flying like shrapnel. Caleb fired back with deadly aim, dropping the lead rider to the ground. Gunpowder smoke curled into the cold morning air, mixing with the scent of blood and dust. The battle had begun. "Left side," Ciala shouted, taking down one who tried to flank around the cattle pen. Nyola fired round after round from above, forcing the attackers behind rocks. But there were too many of them. Wave after wave surged forward, like starving wolves circling their prey. A bullet grazed Caleb's shoulder, blood soaking into his coat. He gritted his teeth, ignoring the pain. Above, Nyola was hit by flying wood, crashing onto the stable roof but still pushing herself up, never letting go of her rifle. "We cannot hold them much longer," she yelled, her voice raw. "We have to hold," Caleb roared back, firing 2 more shots toward the gate. The fight stretched on endlessly. All 3 were wounded, ammunition running low, breathing heavy and strained. In that moment, through the haze of gunfire and smoke, Caleb turned to them and said hoarsely, "If we do not make it, it has been an honor knowing you both." "We are going to make it," Nyola whispered, gripping his hand tight. And then, the earth shook. From the distance came the deep, fierce call of an Apache war horn echoing like thunder from the mountains. On the hilltop, over 100 riders appeared, bows raised and spears gleaming in the rising sunday. Leading them was a tall man draped in deerskin, the new chief. The cavalry poured down like a waterfall. Hoofbeats thundered against the earth. The bounty hunters panicked and fled, but it was too late. They were surrounded, disarmed, and tied down against the cold dirt. When the silence finally returned, Caleb collapsed to his knees in the yard, breath ragged, blood still dripping from his shoulder. Nyola fell into his arms, and both of them laughed through their tears. "We are alive," she whispered. "And we are still together," Caleb replied, gently pressing his lips to her forehead. But the battle inside them was not yet over. As the chief approached, his voice was calm, but his gaze was firm. "It is time for you to come home." The two women looked at each other, then turned to him with unwavering eyes. "No," Nyola said firmly. "We have already found our home. Right here." And in that moment, on the land still soaked with the scent of gunpowder and blood, something changed forever. They were no longer strangers, no longer victims. They had become a family, ready to write a new chapter of their lives. The sun had climbed high above the mountain ridge by the time the last hoofbeat faded into the dry earth. The bloody battle was over. But the air still felt tight like a drawn string. Gunpowder smoke still lingered on the wind. The bounty hunters, those who once spread fear and pain, now lay face down in the dirt, hands bound behind their backs, eyes filled with hatred and fear. The new chief of the Apache tribe, a tall man with long silver hair tied at the back, stepped forward toward Caleb. He looked at the white man before him with an expression hard to read, a mix of gratitude, curiosity, and something that felt like a quiet challenge. "You could end them right now," he said, his voice deep and steady like wind through a canyon. "No one in my tribe would object. They deserve it." Caleb looked at the faces before him, heads bowed. To him, they were no longer monsters, just men who had lost their way to greed and cruelty. He slowly shook his head. "Killing them will not change anything," he replied. "Justice is not revenge. Justice is when the law ends evil, not the barrel of a gun." There was a long pause. Then, the chief nodded slowly, but with weight. "I respect your decision, Ross," he said. "They will be taken to the Southern Valley. The Council of Warriors will judge them by tribal law, and believe me, they will never again be free to hurt anyone." As the bounty hunters were led away, Nyola and Siala walked up to Caleb. Both were still wrapped in bandages, their bodies bruised and battered, but their eyes were brighter than ever. "You could have ended this the easier way," Siala said softly. "No," Caleb smiled. "Easier does not mean right. If we choose hate, then how are we any different from them?" The chief turned back to the two young women, his expression now softer. "This land," he said gently, "was never meant for people like you. It is cold, cruel, and it holds no mercy." Nyola stepped forward, her voice clear and firm. "You are wrong. It is this land that taught us courage. It is this land that gave me a family when the world had nothing left for me. This is our home." A soft breeze swept through the valley, carrying the first warmth of spring. The chief looked deep into the eyes of his daughters, and then, for the first time, he bowed his head. "Then I will not stand in your way," he said quietly. "If this is your home, then the tribe will protect it. Anyone who dares threaten this land will face the fury of our people." As the warriors rode off into the distance, only the three of them remained, standing before the scorched cabin porch, the sunlight casting its golden glow on their weary but peaceful faces. They had survived, they had fought, and more importantly, they had held on to the best part of what makes us human: mercy and justice. For the first time in many years, Caleb no longer felt like a man alone. He had a family to protect and a reason to keep on living. Spring arrived slowly over the land once soaked in blood and tears. Snow melted from the hillsides, revealing rich brown soil and the first bright green sprouts after a long and unforgiving winter. The creek behind the house began to trickle again, weaving its way through rocky beds and freshly budding meadows, carrying with it the breath of new life. The ranch that had once stood as a battlefield now wore a different face. The fence had been rebuilt stronger, the horse stable expanded, and behind the house, Nyola and Siala planted their first rows of corn. Hands once trained only to hold weapons now learned how to sow seeds and tend to the earth. And in those quiet, humble tasks, three once shattered souls slowly found the peace they thought was lost forever. Caleb woke early each morning, as had long become his habit. He fed the livestock, checked the fence lines, then returned to the kitchen to find Nyola baking corn cakes and Siala laughing with the foals. That scene, something that once seemed so distant to a man who had lived in the shadow of his past, had now become the most precious thing in his life. One afternoon, as the golden light of sunset bathed the valley, Caleb sat on the porch, watching the two women tend to the garden. They were strong, resilient, and beautiful in a way he could not look away from. Not beauty of appearance, but of spirit, of souls once broken now learning to trust and love again. "Did you ever think we would have days like this?" Naola asked, setting a basket of vegetables down beside him. "No," Caleb answered, his gaze softening. "I thought my life ended when they were gone. But then the two of you came, and everything began again." Ciala sat beside him, leaning back against a wooden post. "We have all lost so much," she said quietly. "But maybe that is why we know how to value what we have left." A gentle spring breeze swept through, carrying the scent of fresh earth and distant laughter. Smoke rose from the chimney, curling into the fiery evening sky. And in that moment, Caleb realized this was the family he had always dreamed of. Not one born from blood, but one built from choice, loyalty, and love. A few weeks later, the Apache tribe returned as promised. They brought seeds, herbs, and words of blessing. The chief stood before the porch, placing a hand on Caleb's shoulder. "You have turned this place into something I never thought possible, a place worth living in." Caleb simply smiled in return. He knew the road ahead would still be full of hardship, filled with judgment and suspicion from the outside world. But now, he was no longer alone. At his side were two women he called family, and together, they would turn this once ruined land into a true home. As dusk fell and the first stars lit up the Arizona sky, the three of them sat by the fire, sharing a simple meal. No one said it aloud, but in their hearts, they all knew. Every wound can heal, and every broken heart can beat again if it is led by love. Dear friends, kindness is not weakness. It is a quiet strength, powerful enough to melt even the coldest walls of hatred. When we choose forgiveness over vengeance, we do not only save others from the darkness, we also free ourselves. Because in the end, it is compassion that has the power to mend the wounds hatred leaves behind. It has been an honor to share this journey with you. I truly hope that your life is always filled with happiness and peace. I love you all, my dear listeners of Wild West Storytelling. Let me know how you felt about this story. Leave a comment below. Type the number 1 if you enjoyed this story. And do not forget to subscribe to the channel to catch more dramatic tales from the Wild West.